Hi, how you doing? This is Chris. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the Unreal Institute, and we are going to be looking at lighting today. So we're going to go into it fairly lightly. There's a lot of stuff to take on board with lighting, but this is kind of a starter session just so you can kind of understand it a bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on my Unreal Engine. Here we go. As you see, I've got my everything default again, and I've got the same scene as we were looking at last time with some light in. We'll talk about that in a minute. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to go to File, New Level, and from my template list here I'm just going to choose a nice empty level and click Create. Reason being that there's no lights in it, there's nothing in it at all, so we've got a nice clean slate to get started with. Okay, and the reason for that is because I want to do some lighting with you and talk about the lights inside of Unreal Engine, and I also want to implement those lights. Okay, so we're going to need a field to do this on, literally. So let's start off. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my window up here, and I'm going to get my place actors, and then if I move along here to my shapes, I'm just going to grab a plane and just drop that in my scene, and then over here for its location in my details panel, I'm going to change that to 0, 0, 0, and that means it's exactly in the middle of the world. And then for scale, I'm going to change that to 50 by 50 by 50. Now the Z50 won't really make any difference because this thing is just a single-sided plane, but I made it 50, 50, 50 anyway. You can make it 50, 51 and it'd still look exactly the same. Now this has got a collision volume on it already applied, so we don't need to worry about that, but at the minute we can see it and there's no lighting applied to our scene. But if I was to just to right click and do play from here, now we can't see anything, and that's because there's no light in our scene. So what it's doing is, if there's no lights at all in our scene, it'll do this kind of flat lighting pass for us, just so that we know there's something there pretty much. But if I go here to my light panel and just drag a point light over like that and then delete it again, my lighting's now gone and it won't come back to that flat lighting. What I'd have to go is go to the unlit over here and then do that. Okay, so let's get started straight away. We've talked a little bit before about how we made some outside lighting. Okay, we can do that using the, if I go to Window and then my environmental light mixer just here, how we can simply just press all these buttons and it will create a simple light atmosphere for us. And I'll change this from unlit to lit, and there we go. You see, we've got clouds, we've got all the things there that make it up. But maybe it's time that we talked about what these items actually are. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these again. They're just over here in my panel. Hit delete, and instead I'm going to bring these in one at a time to show you and talk to you about what they are. Now the first one was our directional light actor, and this represents the sun. It can also represent the moon, it can represent anything else. And when we drag it into our scene, if you look at it, it's got an arrow that comes off it, and this arrow is representative of the direction the sun is shining. Okay, now we've got nothing to cast shadows here, so if I just get a shape and put a cube in my scene, there we go, and now I rotate it, you'll see that it basically gives us the effect of, you know, the sun shining from different times of day. And you'll notice that as the sun goes down, even though we can't see the sun, the world does darken. Okay, so if I turn off my angle snap here, you'll see that we can make it get darker and darker and darker and darker, like that. Okay, and lighter, lighter, lighter. Now, as well as that, there were some other things that I had, wasn't there? So if we just look at our Place Actors tool panel over here and go to our visual effects, what were the other things we had? Well, we had a sky atmosphere. Okay, and the sky atmosphere is a special actor that basically kind of simulates scattering and simulates an atmosphere so that we get this kind of blue sky here, okay, with the sun sitting up there shining in it. Now, if I get in nice and close to our directional light actor, and we follow the direction of that arrow actually lines up with the position of this kind of sun up here in the sky. Okay, so we also have now got a visual representation of where the sun is. Also, if I pull the sun down like this, we now get sunrises and sunsets, which we didn't have before. Okay, and that is because we're simulating the atmosphere. We're simulating the way that light refracts through the atmosphere. Very, very clever stuff. And we don't have to calculate it ourselves anymore. Now, what else is there? Well, here's volumetric cloud. Now, there's a lot of stuff about volumetric cloud, but for the minute, just drag it into the scene, and you can see, when we do, that it builds us these beautiful volumetric clouds into our scene. Now, we do have the ability to be able to control our volumetric clouds. Let's put the sun there. But for the moment, we're not going to, okay? We're just going to leave them as is, because that's more of an advanced topic. Now, as well as that, we have this exponential height fog. Now, what does that do? Well, if I drag it in, there we go. What this does is it adds a degree of haziness around the edge of our scene. There's always going to be a slight exponential height fog in the real world because there's moisture particles and dust particles or whatever in the air. And so what this is doing is simulating those, or rather simulating the process of those, and that will allow us to have things like light beams, that will allow us to have all sorts of volumetric light effects that otherwise wouldn't work while we're doing this. Okay, so we've got all these things in here and they're all doing just fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select them: directional light, exponential height fog, sky atmosphere, and volumetric cloud. I'm going to put them all at 0, 0, so 0, 0, 0, so they're all in the same place over there. And that way I can find them nice and easily if I want to. Now, let's look at some of the things we can do with these straight away, because we're talking about lighting. We're going to talk about the directional light here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, okay, our cube that we were using just to work out shadows, and I'm going to scale it up just on one side, just so it becomes like a pillar. Okay, there we go. And then through the magic of Unreal Engine, I'm going to duplicate it a few times. And the reason I'm doing this is just to create a kind of a structure. Okay, there we go. So there's some duplication there. Do it again this way, like that. That should do. And then I'm going to just take this cube. I'll turn back on angle snap for this bit. Rotate it 90 degrees. And the reason I do this is because I always find it's a complete mess on trying to get hold of kind of all the materials when you first start to learn. You know, it's like, oh, I need to download this, I need to download this. It's much better if you can just make it yourself. So that's exactly what we're doing. There we go. So we've built this shape here, okay? Now, let's find our sunlight. So if I get my directional light there, and I think I'd like to move it nearer to where the middle of this is so I can control it better. So remember, transform gizmo, there we go. I'll change coordinate systems. And now I can move it over to here, where it's easier for me just to grab this light and play around with it. There we go, I'll turn it back to what it was again. Right, now why have I done that? Well, I want to be able to see the sun like this, and I want to be able to do some little tricks with it, okay? Because at the minute we're just using the default lighting that happens when we drag in our actual directional light. So let's have a look at some of the options that come with it. So we have the intensity. That's literally how intense this sun is, how intense this light is. And we can make it, you know, really unintense. 10's the default here for lux, or we can bring it all the way up to some really high value. Now, that's entirely up to you. I'm just going to use 10 as my value. That's a perfectly reasonable amount. Now we have the source angle. Okay, so source angle starts to get into a more complicated thing. We'll talk about this when we expand upon things like lighting and so on later on. But for the time being, the source angle of 0.5 is just ideal for this. You'll notice that we can kind of increase it and decrease it, and the size of the sun in our preview window increases and decreases just over there. Okay, so it does do something, but let's just leave it alone for the minute. Now we also have the soft source angle, but underneath that we've got the temperature. Now the temperature of the lighting, if you've got any experience in lighting, that affects things like how warm the light appears. So if I drop this down to about 5,000, we've got a much warmer looking light than we have if I drop it up to 7,000, where it looks very cold. I tend to have things at about 5,800 if I'm looking for a nice warm scene, for example. Now you can also turn off whether or not it's affecting the world, like so, and whether or not it's even casting shadows. Now casting shadows is something that takes up processor time, so sometimes you don't want your lights to do that. So this is one of the things we can do. Now as we scroll down, we also have the ability to make it visible or invisible. We can hide it inside of the game so that when we press play it vanishes. And then we've got some information here about light mass. Again, this is a more advanced subject, we'll come back to that. But we've also got these things here, okay? We've got light shaft occlusion, light shaft bloom, bloom tint, and some advanced stuff on the bloom tint as well, okay? And let's just look at what this does. So if I was to press light shaft occlusion, there we go. Now we can see something's just happened over here. If I scroll around my scene, as my light starts to get occluded, you can see that it's producing these kind of rays coming off it here, okay? These additional kind of big god rays, they call them in games. So that's what light shaft occlusion is doing for us. It's producing that. But on top of that, we can also add some bloom to this, and then we get this really bright kind of bloom that you'd get. You sometimes see that when you're outside and there's glass and the sun's hitting off it and giving you that really bright glow off it. So we can apply those directly to our directional light, like so, and it will produce this volumetric light shaft occlusion effect and this light shaft bloom. Now we can turn both of these off naturally, like so, and if we continue to scroll down, we've got more options about cascaded shadow maps and distance field shadows and things. Nothing we really need to go into, but maybe we'd like to cast shadows on clouds. We have the option to do that. We can also cast shadows on our atmosphere, and we can make our clouds cast shadows, which is really handy if you want, if you've got the sun behind a cloud and you want to be able to get some proper occlusion off that. And if you look, it's updating in real time as the cloud moves, the lighting's changing inside of my scene. Now, I've got lumen turned on, which is turned on by default, and so it's doing some pretty crazy GI with this, but don't worry about that. Let's turn off cast cloud shadows for the moment, if I can even pronounce it. Then as we go down, we've got different things like light functions. They allow us to apply things like special materials that will make it flicker and do all sorts of cool things like that. And then just the usual things we tend to find at the bottom. Nothing we need to go into at the minute because we don't want to touch upon anything that's too advanced. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece up here and I'm just going to move it 90 degrees. So I'm going to copy it like so. There we go. Bring it down here, and there's a reason I'm doing this, okay? Move it over here as well. And I'm going to block out the end. So again, I'm not worried about scale. I just want to make it, work. There we go. Do that again. And I'll bring this one over here. Okay, so we've made this interesting inside shape here. And because I've done that now, you can see that we have this global illumination and final gathers taking place. And what's happening here is we're getting light gathering and pooling, and we're getting shadows pooling in the corners, and we're getting an interesting and fairly accurate kind of global illumination in real time using the lumen tools and the lighting tools inside of Unreal Engine. Now, what I'd like to do is I'm going to take my directional light, and remember I said that we can change its intensity, so I'm going to bring its intensity down to about a 2, and you'll notice how that darkens down the inside. Bring it down to a 1, darken it down a little bit more maybe, and I'll put the sun into a sunset style position. There we go, maybe a bit higher. I'll just turn off angle snap for that. So I'm just dragging it down until our room is starting to look a little bit dark. There we are. And the reason for that is because we don't light everything using an outside light, okay? So you can see here we've got this kind of dusky look. And if I go inside of my room that we've created here now, you'll see that it's trying to adapt, okay? Now, we've got an automatic compensation, automatic exposure going on inside of Unreal Engine. What it's trying to do is simulate kind of a fake iris opening and allowing more light in. Now, if I turn this up and then down again, you won't see it as much. But if I go over to my Edit, Project Settings, and I want to find my exposure, so I'll come down to Rendering just here, and inside of my rendering I want to scroll down, keep scrolling down, and eventually, there we are, I'll see these 4 things here. And I'm going to turn off Auto Exposure, Ambient Occlusion Static Fraction, and bloom. So I'm going to turn those three off because I can re-enable them using some different tools. And when I do, you notice it's really dark now, because what's happening is we're not getting that automatic exposure that's doing this kind of fake expansion of the iris. You know, it's not doing this fake exposure like you would get with a camera or with anything else. So as soon as it starts getting dark, it gets real dark in here, okay? And when it gets lighter, it gets much lighter. Now, we can overcompensate for this a little bit, because one kind of lighting we haven't looked at using here is the skylight. So if I was to go to just over here, my lighting panel, I could drag a skylight into my scene, and I could tell it, because you see the options over here, let's have a real-time capture of my entire scene, and I can tell it, you know, how intense I want my capture to be. So if I now bring down my main lights here, but then go to my skylight and bring up its intensity, I can still control a lot of what the skylight's doing in pumping additional lighting into my scene. So it's taking all of the surrounding areas, all of the light that would be hitting it from all the surrounding sky and objects and so on, and it's multiplying that, in this case, by 4. So this is another thing we can do to kind of affect the lighting. Another thing as well that I could do is I could put a tint on this. So if I go to my light color, I could maybe change this to a funky blue. There we go. And then if I just increase the intensity again, not by 200, by about 4, you can see that we get this kind of blue intense color come in here. And this is what we'd do if we were trying to do things like, you know, promote a more of a nighttime look, a cooler nighttime look. We could do this sort of thing, and it would work really well for that. Anyway, let's take that out again. So I'm just going to click on it and delete it. There you can see the difference again of not having any exposure set, so there's no automatic exposure. And Control Z, there it is with the skylight popped in. So I'm just going to reset this, so I'll just hit the reset button here, and I'm going to set its intensity scale to, well, 1's ideal, I suppose. And I'm just going to bring this light up just a tiny bit, so we've got this shadow coming in fairly weakly here. Okay, so we've looked at these two. Okay, we've seen what we can do with that. Now let's have a look at some of the other lighting options we've got here. So we've got point light, we've got spotlight, and we've got rectangular light. Well, the best way to describe and use these really is to get in a couple of props. So if I go to my content drawer down here, and I open up the props folder and start content, and let's just get this SM lamp ceiling, and I'm just going to drag it and drop it on the ceiling, and it'll drag more accurately and snap if I turn off that. So I'll do it again and drag and snap. There we go, like so. Now what I can do with this is I could apply a light to it. Now what I'll do is I'll get this point light, I'll just drag it into my scene, and you'll see that it immediately blows out my scene. It's a very, very bright light, yeah? Also, my light isn't in the right place. Now, placing of lights is massively important, as you can probably well imagine. So what I'd like my light to be round about the position this light bulb's at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my actual light prop, and I'm going to get its location, okay, which is these 3 numbers here. And because I don't want to write them down, what I can do is just right click and do copy, then I'll select my light, right click and paste. And now my light is in exactly the same position as this thing's pivot point. Now I'll bring my light down, down, down like that. There we go, and now my light is inside here, and we can see that it's kind of illuminating like this, and you know, it's a very direct light. It's just bouncing out the light in one direction like that, but that's okay. It's doing an okay job with it. Now what I'd like to do is, remember we talked about tinting the light color, so I can tint it, and I'm going to make it very slightly kind of yellowy, just a slight change to it to give it an artificial look. And I'm going to bring the intensity down, so it's 8 candlers at the minute. Let's bring it to about 4 candlers. There we go. Right, now what else can we do with this? Well, if we pull out, you can see that we have this sphere that's been created around it, and that's our attenuation radius. The attenuation radius is basically how far this light bulb, or this light source rather, is affecting the world. If I reduce this, so I'll just bring it in, bring it in, bring it in, you can see that the effect starts to diminish and diminish and diminish. Now, this is useful for a number of reasons. Not only is it useful because of, you know, how things look ergonomically and how things look artistically, but it's also massively important because in the game now, the lighting is only casting shadowing on a few items rather than casting shadowing on loads of items. And so if we have lots of lights in our scene, this is going to save us quite a lot of processing. Now, what I'll do is I'll just drag this over here, and you can see like the lights take a moment to adjust because I've got lumen on. And I'll pull two lights out, so Shift, Alt, and I'm just going to drag. And you'll notice that if I hold down Shift as well, it allows me to move the light in real time with the camera kind of focusing on it. So now we have these two lights here and here. And these two lights are, well, you can see their attenuation range is overlapping each other. Now I'll make that a bit more apparent by making them about 450. There we go, so they're overlapping. Now, in video games, we have the option to, well, it's not even an option, we can build our games, okay? So that's where we take our game where it's like this, and we build it and make it into executables to go out. And part of the build process is taking our level, this, okay, and compiling it, and taking all the lighting in that scene, and sometimes what we do is we want to bake that lighting into our scene. Now, because these two lights here have an overlapping attenuation radius, we wouldn't be able to bake these lights. Okay, these lights would only ever be able to be, well, one of them would have to be a movable light, and so it would be casting dynamic light over this one, which could be baked. So you could only have one of the two lights actually being a baked light, and the other one would have to be a movable light. What that would mean is that in the game, this wouldn't be baked at all, and then the lighting would be cast dynamically. Now, that's nothing for us to worry about at the moment, but I just want you to kind of hear that and understand that so that, you know, later on down the line, it makes more sense, okay? Because there's lots of little bits of information here. It can be very overwhelming, I can imagine, so don't worry too much. Okay, so we've got our lights going on inside here, and it's looking okay. I like that. So what else can we do in here? Well, remember we were talking about spotlights. Now, if I was to just drag a spotlight in and pop it here, okay, I can move my spotlight, and my spotlight has a cone which will point in one specific direction, and it's an adjustable cone. Now, it's got an attenuation radius just like before, so I'll set that to 500. And we can of course set its light colour, so I'll set that slightly, there we go. But another thing we can do is we can set its inner cone just here, so our inner cone angle, I'll set that to 22. And we can set our outer cone, 33. So now we have a lot of control over which direction and how tightly our spotlight's going. And this is really useful for things like, you know, if you want to have a stage spotlight, or if you want to have security sweep spotlights, or if you just want additional lighting in your scene to make it look nice. This is all an option that we can do. Now, let's try that out, shall we? So I'm going to get my content draw again, and let's get this SM lamp wall, and I'm just going to drag it to this wall. There we go. Now it's at a 90-degree angle, so I'll turn angle snap on and just drag it 90 degrees. There we are. And let's get our spotlight, and I'm just going to put that there. Now, I would like this to be in the same position as this, so we'll do what we did before. I'm going to right click, copy the location, and then right click, paste the location for the light, and then I'm going to face it upwards and move it. And the reason I'm moving it is because if it's overlapping, the actual light is overlapping any geometry, then we're not going to see properly because the geometry will obscure it. And we'd have to turn off that geometry's ability to cast shadows in order for it to work. Now, if we look at this, okay, we can see our cone would actually be much, much wider. So what I'll do is I'll make our inner cone, let's say our inner cone can be 35 degrees, and I'll change our outer cone to maybe 80 degrees. A little bit too wide, okay, let's try 75. There we go, that looks like it's about right. So now what's happening is our light in here is basically diffusing as it goes outwards from our central cone. So that looks a bit better. And again, let's reduce our candles because we don't want it too bright. And if we scroll down, we still have our source radius and source length and so on, our temperature, which can adjust our warmth for it. And as we scroll down, we've also got some other things like light function and so on. But here we are. This is an interesting one. IES texture. Now, if you've never used IES texture before, basically what this allows you to do is use real-world light textures. And you'll find if you go to things like Philips' website and so on, they have tons of them for you to download because they're standardized format. Now, if I go in here, I could search for an IES texture, if I had any. There aren't any in my browser, sadly, for me to grab, but if there were any in here, I could grab them, drag them into here, and I could make it look like a professional specific kind of light or spotlight or anything like that that already exists. So it's a really handy way of doing things. Now again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my mobility to movable. There we are. And I'm going to select both of these and just make some copies, okay, because they're all overlapping each other nicely. So there we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this one at the end, 5. Beautiful. Okay, so we've got these lamps here all coming in. Now I've got my engine set so that lights turn off when I'm a certain distance away from them. Okay, so don't worry that mine's turning on and off like that. It's just to optimize a bit. If you want to see what your lights are doing without seeing all of this stuff, what you can do is you can hit G to go into game mode, and that'll give you a preview of how your lighting's looking. Okay, it'll allow you to kind of tweak things based on that. So for example, I can now adjust my main directional light, I think. Just bring it down and make the scene a bit darker. And we can see that now this is starting to take over the lighting compared to what's going on outside. So these are much better kind of compensating for that. Now what I'll do is I'll bring these down just a little bit more. So I'm just going to select all of my spotlights. And remember, we can edit things en masse if they're the same type of thing. So I'm going to change their intensity now to 1 candela, considerably less. And for these ones up here, I'm going to change these to 2 candelas. Okay, so that's giving it a much softer lighting, more even, certainly a bit more balanced. Okay, I'm liking that. Now, when we get in here, if we go to props, so I'll go to my content drawer again, and I'm just going to grab this table. There we are. And for this table, I'm going to put this statue on it, like so. And I'd like this statue to be highlighted, but I don't want to have to keep using, you know, my light bulbs and things like that. I want to try using a different light for this. So what I'm going to pull in is I'm going to pull in my rectangular light. And a rectangular light's a great way of getting lots and lots of, you know, light coming in from one specific angle that you can control. So if I drag that just to here, and you can see we get this kind of box shape here, and I'm just going to angle it just so that it's facing towards the thing that I want illuminated. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to move it up here into this window area, okay, and just back out of it, because I want this light to illuminate onto this table. So I'm going to need to get it set up a very specific way, and I think I've got it back to front as well, which doesn't help. There we go. Right, now next thing I can do is I can change my source width and source height. So I'm going to change the width so that it's the full width of the entire building, like so. Okay, so I'm going to imagine this is some sort of a funky electric light coming in here or something like that. And then for my source height, I'm going to do the same thing. So just adjust it until it's fairly high. And I'm now going to change the thing called the barn door angle, and if I do that, it'll do what you get with those professional lighting setups, where basically it kind of constrains the light by using barn doors. That's literally what they call them. And now the light will kind of, well, it will literally be constrained by the barn door angle. There we go. So I'll do that. So now we've got light coming in from this. It's being spilled down here. And if you look at the attenuation radius on this, I can probably make it a little bit wider if necessary, so I'll make it 2000. Okay, and I could up the intensity, and I can change the lighting color a little bit, maybe a colder blue coming in like so. There we are. And now I'll change the angle. And this light now is coming in through here and going straight down here. And you can see that it's casting some fairly gentle shadows onto it. Okay, if I spin it round, you can see without and with. Quite a big difference there. Okay, so that's another way that we can light things. But remember what I said earlier about the fact that we're using lumen. So there's another way we can light things, okay? And this one is really, really interesting and important. So if I was to take our statue here, we can see that our statue, if we just double click on it, there we are, has two elements. It has the inside glass part and the outside statue part. Now, if you recall, when we were working on our pillar as one of our assets that we're working on, there we go, if I get its material, which was the emissive, okay, we've got an inst-emissive 1 and 2, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a new one. I'm going to call this matte inst statue emissive. You see, inside of Lumen, self-illuminated materials now have the ability to be able to illuminate objects. So as you can see now, this is illuminating the inside of this building, okay, based on how much illumination power is being put into it through this material. Now I'll double click on the material, there we are, and the emissive strength at the minute's 100, so if I drop that down to maybe nearly 8 and hit save, you can see now that this is illuminating but in a much more gentle manner. Now if I take this outside and we're getting closer, you can see it's illuminating the wall next to it, and it's picking up the colour and bouncing the light back onto itself. So it's a very interesting and also a very good way of being able to illuminate things inside of a scene. Now if I turn this up a bit more, so I'm just going to go to my emissive strength and just bump that up to maybe 45, and I'll change the colour on this to something very blue. Emissive tint, there we go. Click OK. You should see now that it's now driven the scene to being this blue colour because of the strength of its emissive power. Now I'll drop its emissive strength down just so that you can kind of see the difference here. Let's drop it down again to 10, 5, and you can see the original colour returns to the scene as I reduce its emissive strength. Or put it back up again. Very, very powerful way of lighting your scene by using these emissive volumes, okay? I mean these emissive materials. I'll just save that off. There we go. And yeah, why not? I'll save the statue as well. Now do remember this is only a thing to do with Lumen, okay? If we go and turn Lumen off, so I'll go to my project settings over here, and you find Lumen by just coming down to rendering. Keep scrolling down, scrolling down, scrolling down. There's a lot of scrolling in Unreal Engine. Scroll back up again because I've gone past it. Where are you? There you go, Lumen. So I'll turn this off to none, and I'll turn this to none. There we go. And now you can see the difference. It's not illuminating it, and we don't have the global illumination. Okay, so two important things there have completely gone. If I turn them back on again, Lumen, and it will ask me to automatically turn on Lumen for reflections, then our global illuminations come back. And remember, this is real time, so if I right click play from here, one thing you'll notice is that the illumination of this light is washing out a lot of the shadow that my character will be casting. So if I was to get rid of that and then play from here, you can see a little bit better the shadow that she's casting now. Okay, and again, if I was to drag up the environment, I'll just put that light back as well. There we go. So now we've got the strength of this combining with the strength of the light coming in through the window, and we're getting the outside shadows, which are getting soft at the edges. We've got the internal illumination going on by the lights at the top, at the sides, and that, plus of course the piece up there, which we can't see but it is there. And then of course if we come outside, we're entirely dependent on the lighting from the sun. And remember again, the sun does not have any bloom, it does not have any volumetric lighting effects going on because I've turned those off inside of the editor. So this has been basically a visit to the lighting inside of Unreal Engine, and what the basic lighting system is and how you can start using it right away. It's not a technical guide, but it's certainly a guide for you to get started with. And as we go on, when you visit the Institute, you'll find little bite-sized lessons hopefully that will help you if you want to learn more about this, as well as a course that will guide you in the right direction. So until we meet again, my name's Chris Robson. Thanks very much for listening and watching the course, and I will see you again soon. Bye bye for now.